In this lesson, we're going to proceed working with Grasshopper and Rhino, and we're going to create more shapes. And in the previous lesson, I concentrated more on like jewelry design shapes like rings or things that could be bracelets or necklace. And we use different types of surface generation or surface modeling, like the loft tool, the extrude. We saw some more information about the extrude, and also more complex forms and shapes like the one rail sweep and the two rail sweep. So we worked in a hybrid mode a little bit with Grasshopper parameters that can help us to work in a parametric way in Rhino, and a little bit in Rhino because Rhino is easier in terms of creation of curves and lines and shapes, and then also the manipulation and transformation. So we can work in hybrid mode. We can work entirely in Grasshopper, which is kind of difficult if you're not like a really good in mathematics, and or both. We can use both. So I'm gonna talk about some other um, so you can see, yeah, when we work with both, it's really easy, for example, to manipulate or edit a curve here in this two rails whip. I can manipulate the sections and the rails, and it's really easy to do it directly in Rhino rather than using just numeric values or visual scripting in Grasshopper. So, but that's your choice. If you're more like a mathematical guy, you can choose only Grasshopper. Now I will create a new file, and as usual, you can choose here the units, and you can use decimals, so you can use different types of settings. These are just templates. So depending on what you need to create, you can define if it's a small object project or a big, large project. Okay, now that I created a new file in Rhino, we can see that the only object that I entirely created using Grasshopper, it was that one in the middle, which is a shape created with the loft tool and using different circles and also a polyline. So this is showing you the only thing I created only with Grasshopper. So I'm gonna create a new file in Grasshoppers also. And as usual, I wanna start with something simple and basic, and then maybe do something a little bit more complex. So we started with geometry. So we see that here we can insert different types of components or entities. So we have the point, we have the line, we have the surface, we have the solid. And if we right click, we can set directly in Rhino this, and you can see this appears like a polyline. So these are a series of points, and this is something we can manipulate with the gumball using also Grasshopper. So sometimes Grasshoppers also is fine. And then we talk a lot about input and output, and how we can also use the node panel here to see what's happening into a specific node, or we can use the parameter viewer, really useful. Also in the display part, we have a lot of different graphs that you can use. So essentially, it's a matter of what we're doing in Grasshopper and how we visualize it. And one of these ways is to stay in Grasshopper and visualize it just like, graphs, or we can just visualize it in Rhino. We can see what we're doing in Rhino. So this is all like two-dimensional things, or one dimension, like the point, and then we have like more complex entities like boxes or twisted box or SubD or mesh or Brep. So these are the main three types of, let's say, three-dimensional stuff we can create in Grasshopper and Rhino. And I'm gonna create a twisted box here just to do something else, because I want to use it also. I want to do some booleans in this lesson. So just follow. I need to define 8 corners for the twisted box. And so these are the first 4, and then we need to define the other 4. And I'm going to continue here, and you can see 5th, 7, and 8. So once you finish, yeah, that's the problem. It won't appear because this is not bidimensional. This is 3-dimensional, and usually 3-dimensional shape, they are a little bit more complex to create because they work in 3 dimensions. So I'm gonna set the base of the twisted box, and then I'm gonna move up, make sure that my other 4 points are in the top, and you can see it's getting like a planar on that part. So it's positioning those points, and you can see it's a slightly twisted box, and that's another shape. If we bake this, we can see it properly in Rhino as a solid. That's a solid. And then we have meshes, which are made of faces, and then we have SubD, which are like smoothed mesh, and then we have other stuff here, annotation and dimensioning, and for example here the text entity. Now this entity here, it needs to be defined into Rhino. So if I say, okay, set one text entity, you can see that up here is telling me that it needs to be referenced. So we cannot do it like internally in Grasshopper. So many of the stuff you see in here, you need to create it in Rhino and then reference it. So it's not going to be inside Grasshopper when you begin. And then we have here, we saw other stuff here like the numbers, the integers, and also we have the text. Now this text is actually editable inside Grasshopper. So we either put numbers, or we put text, or we put booleans. If we right click, we can set the text now, and we can put letters and numbers. So when you have a text string, you can put numbers or letters. When you have a number string, you only can put numbers. So if I plug a note in here, you can see that this is what I just typed into the node that is not visible, and it's only visible if you visualize it with something. Remember that the information on the node, it's, you know, just in there. It cannot be used until we display it somewhere, and we cannot display using the text entity, for example, but we can find something else. For example, here the text surface, which is another type of surface, uses a text. So it creates like a solid from a text. It creates a polysurface. Now, when we don't know what to do and nothing is actually happening when we create, just look on what it needs. So right now it needs the B value, which is the baseline. And also I want to go into display and see the full names. So draw full names. So you can see we can define the text, the font, the height, the depth of the extrusion, the baseline, and the base surface. So baseline is paramount for this to work. So we're gonna create a line, or we can create a plane, or we can create a curve and associate it. So let's set the curve. And also another interesting thing is that you can use an object like this, which is a solid in Rhino, to set the curve in Grasshopper. And that's going to be like linked to that object. You can see the text now is appearing exactly with the middle axis on that edge, but it's like upside down. So I'm going to use a -1 parameter into the height to invert, in a way, the direction of that. But you know, there are also other ways. I'm just showing you some tips and various ways we can do things. Now also the depth, it's important. The depth, it's the actual extrusion, so like the thickness of the text. So that's another way we can add thickness to something. When you see depth, it means usually the Z or the third dimension of an object. And so we have everything we need. We now have the text, but I want to move down the text a little bit inside the shape. So I'm going